What if the stranger who saved your life turned out to be your own blood? In a quiet Seattle diner, a waitress pours coffee for a billionaire, only to watch him collapse, poisoned before her very eyes. In that split second, her decision to act doesn't just save a man's life. It unravels a web of betrayal, hidden identities, and a conspiracy that's been buried for 8 long years. What no one in that diner knew, what even she didn't know, was that the billionaire was more than just a customer. He was her brother, and the woman who tried to kill him, the same one who had once tried to erase her from existence. This is not just a story about wealth and power. It's a story about survival, forgotten family, and the moment when a waitress discovers she is not who she thought she was. From poisoned coffee to deadly warehouse traps, from secrets buried in blood to the truth that refuses to die. This is the unbelievable story of the waitress and the billionaire. Before we continue, don't forget to like, comment, and share. Subscribe if you haven't. There's a lot of interesting stories coming up. Now back to the story. The morning fog clung to the glass windows of Lucia's diner like ghostly fingers, obscuring the bustling streets of downtown Seattle beyond. Inside, the familiar symphony of clinking plates and sizzling bacon filled the air as Maya Chen wiped down the same vinyl booth for the 3rd time that morning. Her delicate hands, scarred from years of handling hot plates and broken glass, moved with practiced efficiency across the cracked red surface. At 26, Maya possessed an ethereal beauty that seemed almost out of place in the worn diner. High cheekbones that caught the fluorescent light, obsidian black hair pulled into a practical ponytail, and dark eyes that held depths of unspoken stories. Those who looked closely might notice how her left eyebrow bore a tiny scar, a memento from childhood that she unconsciously touched when nervous. What none of the regular customers knew was that Maya Chen wasn't her real name. The documents she'd carried for the past 8 years told that story, but the truth lay buried somewhere in the fragmented memories of her youth. Memories that came to her in flashes during sleepless nights, like puzzle pieces of a life she could barely remember. She'd learned long ago not to trust those glimpses of the past. They showed her glimpses of marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and a boy with kind eyes who used to read her bedtime stories. But those memories felt like someone else's life, like scenes from a movie she'd watched and forgotten. The bell above the diner's entrance chimed with its usual off-key note, and Maya glanced up to see a figure that seemed to step straight out of the financial district's most exclusive boardrooms. Alexander Whitmore stood in the doorway, his 6'2" frame filling the space with an unconscious authority that made other customers instinctively straighten in their seats. His tailored charcoal suit probably cost more than Maya made in 6 months, and his platinum watch caught the morning light like a beacon of wealth. But it was his face that made Maya pause mid-wipe. Angular features softened by unexpectedly warm brown eyes, dark hair with just a touch of silver at the temples, and a jawline that spoke of both determination and something else. Something familiar that she couldn't quite place. Alexander Whitmore, known to the world as the 34-year-old tech mogul who'd built his empire from nothing. The man whose AI innovations had revolutionized 3 industries. The billionaire who graced magazine covers with his mysterious smile. But standing in Lucia's diner at 8:30 on a Tuesday morning, he looked tired. More than tired. Haunted. The kind of exhaustion that came from carrying secrets too heavy for one person to bear. He chose a corner booth, the same one Maya had been cleaning, sliding into the worn seat with the careful movements of someone who'd learned to be cautious about everything. His security detail, 2 stone-faced men in dark suits, positioned themselves by the windows, their eyes constantly scanning the street outside. Maya had seen important people before, politicians and local celebrities who occasionally slummed it at the diner for photo opportunities, but this felt different. This man wasn't here for show. Or, coffee? Maya approached with the practiced smile she'd perfected over years of customer service, but something about Alexander made the smile feel more genuine than usual. Our special today is blueberry pancakes with just coffee, he interrupted, then seemed to catch himself. Please, black, no sugar. His voice carried a slight rasp, as if he'd been talking for hours, and when their eyes met, Maya felt that strange flutter of recognition again. Like looking into a mirror that reflected not her face, but something deeper, a shared experience she couldn't name. As Maya poured the coffee, her hands remained steady despite the odd nervousness that had settled in her chest. Alexander watched her movements with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable but somehow wasn't. Instead, it felt like being truly seen for the first time in years. "You're new," he said, though it came out more like a question. 8 years, Maya replied, setting the cup down carefully. Not exactly new anymore. Something flickered across Alexander's features. Surprise, maybe, or confusion. 8 years, he repeated the words as if testing their weight. Do I know you from somewhere? The question hung in the air between them like smoke, and Maya felt her pulse quicken. She'd learned to deflect such inquiries with practiced ease, but something about this man made her want to tell the truth, even though she wasn't sure what the truth actually was. "I don't think so," she said finally. "I'd remember meeting someone like you." Alexander lifted the coffee cup, and Maya noticed his hands weren't quite steady. For a billionaire who commanded boardrooms and made decisions that affected thousands of lives, he seemed strangely vulnerable sitting in her section of a downtown diner. She was about to retreat to give him privacy when she noticed something that made her blood run cold. The coffee cup was trembling in Alexander's grip, but not from nervousness. His lips had taken on a bluish tinge, and small beads of sweat were forming on his forehead despite the diner's cool morning air. His breathing had become shallow, labored, and his eyes were beginning to lose focus. "Sir?" Maya leaned closer, her voice dropping to an urgent whisper. "Are you all right?" Alexander tried to speak, but only a strangled sound escaped his throat. His hand flew to his chest, fingers clawing at his tie as if it were choking him. The coffee cup slipped from his grasp, crashing to the floor in a shower of ceramic shards and dark liquid. Maya's training from her brief stint as a nursing student kicked in immediately. She dropped out after 2 years when the money ran out, but she remembered enough to recognize the signs of poisoning. The bluish tinge to his lips, the rapid onset of symptoms, the way his pupils were dilating. This wasn't a heart attack or panic attack. Someone had tried to kill Alexander Whitmore, and they'd done it in her diner. "Don't move," she whispered urgently, her hand instinctively going to his shoulder. The touch seemed to ground him, and his panicked eyes focused on her face. "I'm going to help you, but you need to trust me." The security detail was already moving, their hands reaching inside their jackets, but Maya held up her free hand in a stop gesture. "Call 911, but don't let them touch him. This is poison, and moving him could make it worse." She didn't know where the certainty came from, but she knew with absolute conviction that Alexander's life hung in the balance, and that she was the only person in that diner who could save him. Her mind raced through possibilities. What kind of poison acted this fast? What could counteract it? How much time they had before irreversible damage occurred? "Your coffee," she said, examining the shattered cup on the floor. The remaining liquid had an almost oily sheen to it, and there was a faint, bitter almond smell that hadn't been there when she'd poured it from the fresh pot. "Someone got to your coffee. When? How long ago did you order?" Alexander managed to shake his head slightly, his eyes never leaving her face. He was fighting to stay conscious, fighting to communicate something important, but the poison was working fast. Maya's gaze swept the diner, taking in every detail with new eyes. The other customers seemed oblivious to the drama unfolding in the corner booth. An elderly man reading his newspaper, a young mother feeding her toddler, a businessman typing on his laptop. But her attention caught on a figure near the counter, a woman in a navy blue business suit who was watching their table with barely concealed satisfaction. The woman was beautiful in a cold, calculated way. Platinum blonde hair styled in a perfect bob, ice blue eyes, and red lips that curved in what might have been a smile if it had reached her eyes. She was probably in her early 30s, with the kind of polished appearance that screamed expensive education and careful grooming. But there was something predatory in the way she watched Alexander struggle, something that made Maya's skin crawl. "The woman by the counter," Maya whispered to Alexander. "Do you know her?" Alexander's eyes followed Maya's gaze, and what she saw in his expression confirmed her suspicions. Recognition, betrayal, and something that looked like heartbreak all flashed across his features before the poison claimed more of his strength. The woman, whoever she was, had been waiting for this moment. She'd positioned herself perfectly to watch Alexander die, and from the calculating look in her eyes, she was probably already planning her next move. The woman's manicured fingers drummed against her purse with barely contained excitement, and Maya realized with growing horror that this wasn't just about money or business rivalry. This was personal. "I'm going to get you out of here," Maya said, her voice filled with a determination that surprised even her. She'd spent 8 years hiding from her past, avoiding complications, staying invisible. But looking at Alexander's face, at the trust and desperate hope in his eyes, she knew there was no walking away from this moment. She helped him to his feet, supporting more of his weight than should have been possible for someone her size. Years of physical labor had made her stronger than she looked, but there was something else driving her now, something that felt like muscle memory. As if she'd done this before, as if protecting this man was written into her very DNA. The security detail moved to help, but Maya shook her head sharply. "The parking garage," she said to the nearest agent. "Is there another way out?" "Service entrance through the kitchen," one of them replied, his voice crisp and professional despite the chaos. "But we should wait for—" "No time," Maya cut him off. She could feel Alexander's strength ebbing with each passing second, could see the way his legs were beginning to buckle. "That woman by the counter, she's involved. She's probably not alone." As they began their slow progress toward the kitchen, Maya caught sight of the blonde woman's reflection in the window. The satisfied smile had vanished, replaced by something much more dangerous. The woman was reaching into her purse, and Maya's instincts screamed danger. "Move now!" Maya shouted, pulling Alexander forward just as the distinctive crack of gunfire shattered the morning quiet. The diner erupted into chaos. Screaming customers diving under tables, the crash of falling dishes, the acrid smell of gunpowder mixing with the lingering aroma of breakfast. But Maya's focus remained laser-sharp on getting Alexander to safety. She half-carried, half-dragged him through the swinging kitchen doors as more shots rang out behind them. The kitchen staff scattered like startled birds, but Maya barely noticed. Her entire world had narrowed to the weight of Alexander's arm around her shoulders, the sound of his labored breathing, and the growing certainty that this moment was somehow connected to the fragments of memory that had haunted her for years. They burst through the service exit into the gray Seattle morning, where Alexander's security team was already bringing a black SUV to a screeching halt. As they bundled him into the back seat, Alexander's hand caught Maya's wrist with surprising strength. "Don't! Leave!" he gasped, his brown eyes boring into hers with desperate intensity. "Need to tell you I'm not going anywhere," Maya promised, though she had no idea why those words felt like a vow she'd made before. She slid into the SUV beside him as the vehicle lurched into motion, tires squealing against asphalt. As they raced through Seattle's morning traffic toward the nearest hospital, Maya kept pressure on Alexander's pulse points and monitored his breathing. The poison was still working through his system, but she could see that he was fighting it with everything he had. There was something about his determination, about the way he refused to give up, that reminded her of someone important. "The woman," Alexander managed to whisper as they took a sharp turn. "My business partner, Victoria Sterling." The name hit Maya like a physical blow, though she couldn't say why. Victoria Sterling. It meant nothing to her conscious mind, but somewhere deeper, in the place where her forgotten memories lived, the name resonated like a warning bell. "She's been planning this," Alexander continued, each word a struggle. "But not just me. Looking for someone else. Someone she thinks is dead." Maya's blood turned to ice. "Who?" Alexander's eyes met hers, and in them she saw not just the effects of poison, but a recognition that made her heart stop. "My sister," he whispered. "She's been looking for my sister." The words hung in the air between them as the SUV screeched to a halt outside Seattle General Hospital. As the medical team rushed Alexander away on a gurney, Maya stood frozen in the emergency bay, his words echoing in her mind like thunder. "Your sister. She's been looking for your sister," and somewhere in the deepest part of her consciousness, a door that had been locked for 8 years began to creak open, letting in light that illuminated memories she'd thought were lost forever. Memories of a boy who used to read her bedtime stories, who'd promised he'd always protect her, who'd cried when the social workers came to take her away. Maya Chen might not be her real name, but as she watched Alexander Whitmore disappear through the hospital doors, she began to suspect that her story, their story, was far from over. In fact, she was beginning to realize that it had barely begun. The morning fog was lifting from Seattle's streets, but Maya felt as if she were walking deeper into a mist that had been obscuring her vision for years. Whatever Victoria Sterling was planning, whatever secrets lay buried in the past, Maya knew with absolute certainty that her quiet life as a diner waitress was about to change forever. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a little girl's voice whispered a name she hadn't spoken in 8 years, a name that belonged to the brother who'd promised never to forget her, even when everyone else already had. The steady beeping of Alexander's heart monitor had become Maya's anchor to reality over the past 18 hours. She sat in the uncomfortable hospital chair, her uniform still stained with coffee and marked with the chaos of yesterday morning, watching the rise and fall of his chest as the last of the poison worked its way out of his system. The doctors had called it a miracle. Whoever had dosed his coffee had used enough cyanide compound to kill 3 men, but Alexander's unusually fast metabolism and Maya's quick thinking had saved his life. What they didn't know, what Maya couldn't bring herself to tell them, was that sitting beside his bed felt like the most natural thing in the world, as if she'd kept vigil over him before. Alexander stirred at 3:17 a.m., his brown eyes opening slowly before focusing on Maya's face with laser precision. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The hospital room's dim lighting cast shadows across his angular features, and Maya found herself studying the small scar above his left eyebrow, a thin white line that looked remarkably similar to her own. "You stayed," he said, his voice rough from the intubation tube they'd removed hours earlier. "I promised I wouldn't leave," Maya replied, though the words felt heavier than they should have. "How are you feeling?" Alexander pushed himself up against the pillows, wincing slightly. "Like I've been poisoned by my business partner and saved by a waitress who seems to know exactly what she's doing in a crisis." His eyes never left her face as he spoke. "Maya Chen, that's what your name tag said." There was something in the way he said her name that made Maya's chest tighten. Not suspicion, exactly, but a probing quality that suggested Alexander Whitmore hadn't become a billionaire by accepting things at face value. "It's on all my documentation," she said carefully, "but it's not your real name." It wasn't a question, and Maya felt her carefully constructed defenses beginning to crumble. She'd spent 8 years perfecting the art of deflection, of becoming invisible, of never drawing the kind of attention that led to uncomfortable questions. But Alexander's gaze held something that made lying feel impossible. "Why would you think that?" Alexander shifted in the hospital bed, and Maya noticed how he favored his left side. An old habit, maybe, or an old injury. Because when Victoria pointed that gun at us yesterday, you moved like someone who'd been trained. Not self-defense classes, not basic safety courses. You moved like someone who'd been taught to protect people like it was muscle memory. Maya's heart began to race, but she kept her expression neutral. Maybe I just have good instincts. Maybe. Alexander's voice was soft, but his eyes remained sharp. Or maybe you're the person Victoria Sterling has been hunting for the past 8 years. The person she thinks is dead. The person she's willing to kill to keep buried. The words hit Maya like physical blows, and she felt the room spinning around her. Victoria Sterling. The name that had felt like ice in her veins yesterday now felt like fire, burning through the carefully constructed walls she'd built around her memories. I don't know what you're talking about, she whispered, but even as she said it, images were flooding back. A woman with platinum blonde hair and cold blue eyes, standing in a marble foyer. The same woman, younger, smiling as she handed a little girl a cup of hot chocolate. The same woman, furious, screaming at someone just out of view while a small boy tried to shield his sister behind him. Alexander was watching her face intently, and Maya realized her carefully neutral expression had cracked. You do remember her, don't you? Victoria Sterling, my father's second wife, my stepmother, the woman who convinced everyone that my 8-year-old sister died in that car accident. Maya's hands began to shake. Car accident. She remembered twisted metal, the taste of blood, someone screaming her name, but not Maya, another name. A name that belonged to marble floors and crystal chandeliers and a boy who read her bedtime stories. I need some air, Maya said, standing abruptly. But Alexander's hand shot out, grasping her wrist with surprising strength for someone who'd been poisoned less than 24 hours ago. Sophia, he said quietly. Your name is Sophia Whitmore. You're my little sister, and I've been looking for you for 8 years. The name hit her like a tsunami, washing away 8 years of carefully constructed identity in a single moment. Sophia. She was Sophia Whitmore, and the boy with kind eyes who used to read her bedtime stories wasn't a dream or a fantasy. He was sitting right in front of her, grown into a man who'd built an empire while searching for his lost sister. Maya. Sophia sank back into the chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her weight. The accident, she whispered. I remember the accident. Victoria was driving. She said it was raining, that she couldn't see, but what? Alexander leaned forward, his voice urgent but gentle. What do you remember? The memories were coming faster now, like a dam bursting. She wasn't looking at the road. She was looking at me in the rearview mirror, and she was smiling. Not a happy smile, a satisfied smile, like she'd gotten exactly what she wanted. Sophia's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. She drove us into that tree on purpose. Alexander's jaw tightened, and Sophia could see fury building behind his eyes. The police report said you were thrown from the car. They found blood on the rocks by the river, pieces of your dress, but no body. Victoria insisted you must have been swept away by the current. I woke up downstream, Sophia said, the memories flowing like water now. There was a homeless man, Eddie, who pulled me out. I was hurt, confused. I couldn't remember anything except being afraid. Eddie took care of me for weeks while I healed, and when I finally remembered some things, I was too scared to go back. Scared of what? Sophia met her brother's eyes, and in them she saw the same fear that had driven her into hiding. Scared of Victoria, because I remembered what she said right before she crashed the car. She said that with me gone, there would be no one left to inherit Father's real fortune, no one left to challenge her claim to the Whitmore Trust. Alexander's face went pale. The trust fund. I'd forgotten about that. Father set it up when we were children. The primary inheritance was supposed to be split equally between his biological children when we turned 25. But if one of us died, the survivor gets everything, Sophia finished. But Victoria married father when he was already sick, and she knew he was going to die soon. She needed me out of the picture permanently. So she tried to kill you and make it look like an accident." Alexander's voice was filled with a cold rage that Sophia had never heard from the gentle boy in her memories. "And when that failed, she spent 8 years hunting for any trace that you might have survived." Sophia nodded, pieces of the puzzle finally clicking into place. "That's why she was at the diner yesterday. She wasn't there to kill you. She was following a lead about me. But when she saw us together, saw the way we looked at each other, she realized we'd found each other," Alexander said grimly, "and she decided to eliminate both problems at once." The hospital room fell silent except for the steady beeping of monitors and the distant sounds of the hospital's night shift. Sophia stared at her hands, scarred from years of waitressing, calloused from hard work, but bearing the same long fingers and distinctive thumb shape as the man sitting across from her. How had she not seen it immediately? "Why didn't you recognize me?" she asked. "Yesterday at the diner I felt like I knew you, but I thought it was just—" "You look different," Alexander said softly. "Your hair was longer then, lighter, and you were 8 years old. I've been looking for that little girl for so long I didn't expect to find a woman who'd learned to survive on her own." His voice carried a note of admiration mixed with regret. "I should have found you sooner. I should have known Victoria was lying." "You were 16 when it happened," Sophia said. "What could you have done?" "More than I did." Alexander's hand clenched into a fist against the hospital blanket. "I let her convince me that searching for your body was unhealthy, that I needed to move on. I was so focused on grieving that I never questioned her version of events." "But you did search for me later," Sophia said. "Your security team, the resources you've spent. Victoria said she's been looking for someone she thinks is dead. She meant me. But she's been following your investigation, hasn't she?" Alexander nodded grimly. "For the past 3 years, ever since I turned 25 and gained full control of my part of the inheritance, I hired the best private investigators money could buy, but Victoria has connections everywhere. Every lead seemed to disappear. Every witness developed amnesia or suddenly died in convenient accidents. She's been covering her tracks," Sophia realized, "eliminating anyone who might have seen me survive, anyone who might have helped me." "Eddie," Alexander said suddenly, "the homeless man who saved you, is he still alive?" Sophia's blood ran cold. "I don't know. I haven't seen him in years, but—" She trailed off as a horrifying possibility occurred to her. "Alexander, if Victoria has been tracking your investigation and if she now knows who I am, she'll eliminate everyone who can connect us to the truth," he finished, "starting with anyone who helped you survive." As if summoned by their fears, Alexander's phone buzzed with an incoming message. His face went ashen as he read the screen, then turned it toward Sophia. The message was from Victoria Sterling, and it contained a single photograph. Eddie, the homeless man who'd saved Sophia's life 8 years ago, tied to a chair in what looked like an abandoned warehouse. Below the photo was a simple message: "Come alone, or I start cutting off pieces. You have 2 hours. Old Pier Warehouse District, Pier 47. Sophia felt bile rise in her throat. She has Eddie. After all these years, she found him. "This is a trap," Alexander said, already reaching for his clothes. "She knows we'll come, and she'll be ready for us." "We can't leave him there," Sophia said, though every instinct screamed at her to run, to disappear again, to return to the safety of anonymity. "He saved my life. I won't let her kill him because of me." Alexander paused in his movements, studying his sister's face. "You know this is probably a suicide mission. Victoria has had 8 years to plan for this moment. She'll have backup, weapons, probably explosives to destroy any evidence afterward." "I know." Sophia's voice was steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. "But I'm tired of running. I'm tired of being afraid. And I'm tired of Victoria Sterling thinking she can destroy our family and get away with it." Something shifted in Alexander's expression, the successful businessman fading away to reveal the protective older brother Sophia remembered from her childhood. "Then we go together, but we do this smart. No heroics, no unnecessary risks." "What about your security team?" "Victoria will be watching for them. If she sees anyone who looks like professional security, Eddie dies." Alexander was pulling on his shoes now, moving with the careful precision of someone who'd learned to function despite pain. "But she won't be expecting a waitress and a recently poisoned billionaire to mount any kind of serious rescue." Sophia almost smiled at that. "She's underestimated us before." "That she has." Alexander stood, testing his balance. The poison had left him weaker than he wanted to admit, but Sophia could see the determination burning in his eyes. "But this time, we're not 8 and 16. This time, we know what she is." As they prepared to leave the hospital, Sophia caught sight of herself in the bathroom mirror. For 8 years, she'd seen Maya Chen looking back at her, a woman who kept her head down, who avoided complications, who'd learned to be invisible. But now she saw Sophia Whitmore, daughter of one of Seattle's most prominent families, sister to a man who'd never stopped looking for her, survivor of a murder attempt that should have killed her. The transformation was more than just recognition. It was reclamation. Victoria Sterling had tried to erase Sophia Whitmore from existence, but she'd failed. And now it was time for Victoria to face the consequences of that failure. They slipped out of the hospital through a service entrance, avoiding the main lobbies where Victoria's people might be watching. The Seattle streets were dark and nearly empty at 4:30 in the morning, but Sophia found herself hyper-aware of every shadow, every parked car, every figure in the distance. After 8 years of hiding, stepping back into Victoria's crosshairs felt like voluntarily walking into a trap. But as they made their way toward the warehouse district, Sophia realized something had changed. The fear was still there, would probably always be there, but it was no longer the paralyzing terror that had defined her existence. She was no longer alone. The brother who'd once promised to protect her was walking beside her, and this time, she was old enough and strong enough to protect him in return. The old Pier warehouse district loomed ahead of them, a maze of abandoned buildings and rusted shipping containers that provided countless hiding places for someone with Victoria's resources. Somewhere in that urban wasteland, a good man was paying the price for an act of kindness he'd performed 8 years ago. Somewhere in those shadows, Victoria Sterling was waiting with whatever final trap she'd prepared. But Sophia Whitmore was done running, done hiding, done letting fear make her decisions. Whatever happened in the next few hours, it would end the chapter of her life that had begun with twisted metal and the taste of blood. One way or another, the long hunt was finally coming to an end. As they approached Pier 47, Alexander reached out and took his sister's hand. It was a gesture that connected them across 8 years of separation, a promise that whatever they faced, they would face it together. And for the first time since that terrible night when she'd awakened on the riverbank, Sophia Whitmore felt like she was finally coming home. The fog rolling off Elliott Bay had turned the warehouse district into a maze of gray shadows and muffled sounds. Pier 47 stood like a monument to Seattle's industrial past, its rusted metal skeleton reaching toward the pre-dawn sky like the ribs of some massive beast. Sophia felt her pulse quicken as they approached the designated meeting point, a cavernous building that had once processed salmon for the Pacific fishing fleet, but now served as a tomb for forgotten dreams, and, possibly, for the 3 people whose lives hung in the balance. Alexander moved beside her with the careful gait of someone still recovering from near-fatal poisoning, but his brown eyes burned with a focus that reminded Sophia of their father in his prime. The resemblance was uncanny, now that she could see it clearly. The same determined set to his jaw, the same way of tilting his head when concentrating, the same protective instinct that had once made Richard Whitmore one of Seattle's most formidable businessmen. "She's watching us," Alexander murmured as they approached the warehouse's main entrance. "Can you feel it?" Sophia nodded. After 8 years of survival on the streets and in low-wage jobs, she'd developed an almost supernatural awareness of being observed. The sensation was crawling up her spine like ice water, raising goosebumps on her arms despite the mild morning temperature. Victoria Sterling was somewhere in the shadows, probably with a sniper's scope trained on them, savoring this moment she'd been orchestrating for nearly a decade. The warehouse door stood slightly ajar, revealing nothing but darkness beyond. No guards visible, no obvious traps, just the yawning mouth of a building that felt like it was waiting to swallow them whole. But Sophia had learned long ago that the most dangerous traps were the ones you couldn't see. "Remember," Alexander said quietly, "she needs us alive long enough to sign documents transferring our inheritance rights. She's not going to just shoot us on sight." "But once she has what she wants—" Sophia didn't need to finish the sentence. They both knew Victoria's track record with loose ends. They stepped through the doorway together, and immediately the atmosphere changed. The warehouse interior was vast and hollow, filled with the ghost sounds of machinery that had fallen silent decades ago. Shafts of gray light filtered through broken skylights, creating pools of visibility in an ocean of shadows. The air smelled of rust, salt water, and something else, something organic and unpleasant that made Sophia's stomach turn. "Welcome home, children." Victoria Sterling's voice echoed from somewhere high above them, amplified by hidden speakers that gave her words an otherworldly quality. She sounded exactly as Sophia remembered, cultured, controlled, with just a hint of an accent that suggested European finishing schools and old money. But there was something new in her tone now, a satisfaction that bordered on ecstasy. "It's been such a long time, hasn't it, Sophia? Though I suppose you prefer Maya these days, such a common name for someone who was born to greatness." Sophia fought the urge to look up toward the sound of Victoria's voice. Instead, she scanned the warehouse floor methodically, looking for Eddie, for guards, for any advantage they might be able to exploit. The building was larger than it had appeared from outside, with multiple levels connected by rickety catwalks and stairs. Perfect sniper nests, perfect places to hide an army. "Where's Eddie?" Alexander called out, his voice steady despite the circumstances. "Oh, your little pet hobo is here. A bit worse for wear, I'm afraid, but alive. For now." There was a mechanical sound, like pulleys engaging, and suddenly a spotlight blazed to life in the center of the warehouse. Eddie hung suspended 20 feet above the concrete floor, bound to what looked like a crane hook with industrial chains. Even from a distance, Sophia could see the blood on his weathered face and the unnatural angle of his left arm. But his eyes were open, alert, and when he saw her, his cracked lips formed a single word: run. Eddie looked every one of his 60-plus years, and then some. Years of living rough had carved deep lines into his face, turned his hair white, and bent his shoulders with the weight of countless hardships. But his eyes, pale blue and sharp as broken glass, still held the kindness that had saved an 8-year-old girl from drowning 8 years ago. Those same eyes now blazed with fury at seeing Sophia walk into Victoria's trap. "You son of a bitch saved the wrong child," Victoria's voice continued, seeming to come from everywhere at once. "Did you know that, Eddie? Did you know that pulling little Sophia from that river cost me 8 years of hunting, 8 years of cleaning up loose ends, 8 years of wondering if my one mistake was going to come back to destroy everything I'd built?" "Let him go," Sophia shouted, her voice echoing in the vast space. "Your problem is with me, not him." "Oh, my dear girl, my problem was never just with you. My problem is with the entire concept of the Whitmore legacy, of inherited wealth passed down to ungrateful children who never earned a penny of it." Victoria's tone was growing more animated, more unstable. Do you have any idea what it was like, watching your father shower you two with everything while I had to smile and play the loving stepmother? A figure emerged from the shadows on one of the upper catwalks. Victoria Sterling in the flesh, but transformed from the composed businesswoman Sophia remembered. Her platinum blonde hair was pulled back severely, emphasizing the sharp angles of her face. She wore all black, tactical pants, combat boots, a fitted jacket that couldn't quite conceal the gun holstered at her hip. Her ice blue eyes glittered with a manic intensity that suggested she'd been planning this moment in obsessive detail. You were 8 years old and already had a trust fund worth $50 million, Victoria continued, beginning to pace along the catwalk like a caged predator. Alexander was 16 and set to inherit controlling interest in Whitmore Industries. And what did I have? A marriage contract, and the promise that maybe, if I was very good and very patient, I'd get a small settlement when your father died. So you decided to kill us, Alexander said flatly. I decided to take what should have been mine by right. Victoria's voice cracked like a whip. I earned that money by putting up with your father's declining health, by playing nursemaid to a dying man, by pretending to love children who represented everything I'd never be able to have. Sophia felt pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. Victoria hadn't just been after the inheritance. She'd been driven by years of resentment, of feeling like an outsider in the family she'd married into. The attempted murder hadn't been purely financial. It had been personal, intimate, born from a hatred that had festered for years. The car accident, Sophia said, her voice carrying clearly in the warehouse acoustics. You'd been planning it for months, hadn't you? Waiting for the right opportunity. Victoria's smile was visible even from the warehouse floor, cold, satisfied, utterly without remorse. Your father's health was failing faster than expected. The doctors said he had weeks, maybe days. I realized that if I was going to act, it had to be immediately. So I volunteered to pick you up from your piano lesson, suggested a scenic route home through the hills. And when you realized I'd survived? Sophia asked. Panic at first, then opportunity. Victoria pulled out what looked like a tablet computer, its screen glowing in the dim warehouse light. I convinced everyone that searching for your body was traumatizing Alexander, that we needed to accept your death and move forward. Meanwhile, I began building my own network, private investigators, contacts in law enforcement, people who could make problems disappear. Alexander stepped forward slightly, and Sophia noticed he was favoring his right side now. The effects of the poison were still with him, probably worse than he was letting on. But you made mistakes. You couldn't resist checking up on my investigation into Sophia's disappearance. Every time I got close to the truth, you were there to muddy the waters. Not mistakes, Victoria corrected. Insurance. I needed to know what you knew, needed to make sure that if Sophia had somehow survived, I'd find her before you did. Her gaze shifted to Sophia, and the hatred in those ice-blue eyes was like a physical force. But I have to admit, I never expected to find her serving coffee in a downtown diner. 8 years of living like a common laborer when you could have been living like a princess. What a waste. I wasn't living like anything, Sophia said, surprised by the strength in her own voice. I was just living. Something you tried to take away from me. Victoria's laugh echoed through the warehouse like breaking glass. Oh, my dear. I haven't even begun to take things away from you. Eddie here is just the appetizer. She pressed something on the tablet, and suddenly the warehouse was filled with light as dozens of additional spotlights blazed to life. The illumination revealed the true scope of Victoria's preparation. Armed men positioned throughout the building, sniper nests in the rafters, explosive charges wired to the main support beams. This wasn't just a trap. It was a fortress designed to ensure that no one left alive. But the lights also revealed something else that made Sophia's blood run cold. Arranged around the warehouse floor like macabre decorations were photographs. Dozens of them, blown up to poster size and mounted on easels. Every person who had helped Sophia survive over the past 8 years was represented. The nurse who'd treated her injuries without asking questions, the social worker who'd helped her get fake identification, the landlord who'd rented her a room when she had no credit history, the diner owner who'd given her a job despite her lack of references. And every single photograph had a red X drawn across the face. "Dead," Victoria said conversationally, as if discussing the weather. "Every single person who helped you build your little life as Maya Chen. Some accidents, some suicides, some just disappeared. It's amazing how many people can vanish without anyone asking difficult questions." Sophia felt her knees buckle, and only Alexander's steadying hand kept her upright. All those people, all that kindness, all those lives ended because they'd shown compassion to a scared girl who needed help. The weight of their deaths settled on her shoulders like lead. "You're insane," Alexander said, his voice filled with disgust. "I'm thorough," Victoria corrected. "Which brings us to tonight's main event. You see, I've realized that simply killing you two isn't enough anymore. Too messy, too many questions, and frankly, after 8 years of this cat-and-mouse game, I want something more satisfying than just eliminating obstacles." She pressed another control on the tablet, and a section of the warehouse floor began to rise, revealing a sophisticated recording setup complete with cameras, lighting, and what looked like legal documents spread across a polished table. "You're going to sign over your inheritance rights," Victoria continued. "All of them. The trust funds, the company shares, the real estate holdings, everything. And you're going to do it on camera, stating clearly that you're doing so of your own free will because you've realized you don't deserve the Whitmore legacy." "And if we refuse?" Alexander asked, though they all knew the answer. Victoria's smile widened, and she gestured toward Eddie's suspended form. "Then I start with him, slowly, creatively, and I make sure you watch every second of it. Then I move on to some other people you might care about." She pressed the tablet again, and additional monitors flickered to life around the warehouse. Each screen showed live surveillance footage. Alexander's penthouse apartment, the hospital where they'd spent the night, the diner where Sophia had worked, and half a dozen other locations. In each image, armed figures lurked in the shadows, waiting for orders. "I have people positioned at every location that's been important to either of you over the past few years," Victoria explained. "The doctor who treated Alexander for poisoning, the nurses who cared for him, the security guards who've been protecting him, even the janitor who cleans his office building. One word from me, and they all die. Messily." Sophia realized with growing horror that Victoria had turned their entire lives into weapons against them. Every connection they'd made, every person who'd shown them kindness, every relationship they'd built was now a potential victim. The web of destruction Victoria had woven was so vast that even if they somehow escaped the warehouse, dozens of innocent people would pay the price. "You have 10 minutes to make your decision," Victoria said, checking an expensive watch on her wrist. "Sign the documents, renounce your claims to the Whitmore fortune, and I'll make your deaths quick and relatively painless. Refuse, and I'll spend the next several hours showing you exactly what it costs to defy me." As if to emphasize her point, she pressed another control, and Eddie's suspended form dropped several feet before jerking to a halt, the chains cutting deeper into his bonds. His muffled cry of pain echoed through the warehouse, and Sophia saw red. 8 years of running, 8 years of fear, 8 years of letting Victoria Sterling dictate the terms of her existence. But as she looked at Eddie, beaten and bloody and suspended like bait, something inside Sophia Whitmore finally snapped. The scared 8-year-old girl died in that moment, replaced by someone harder, someone who'd learned that sometimes the only way to stop a predator was to become something more dangerous. "Alexander," she said quietly, never taking her eyes off Victoria's gloating face. Do you remember what Father used to say about bullies? Alexander's expression shifted, understanding flickering in his brown eyes. Sometimes you have to hit back twice as hard as they hit you. Exactly. Sophia stepped forward into the circle of light, her voice carrying clearly through the warehouse. Victoria, I've got a counter-proposal for you. Victoria Sterling's laughter echoed through the warehouse like the sound of breaking crystal, but Sophia noticed something that her stepmother probably didn't realize she was revealing, a slight tremor in her hands as she gripped the tablet, a barely perceptible tick at the corner of her left eye. For all her careful planning and psychological manipulation, Victoria was operating on adrenaline and 8 years of obsessive hatred. She was unraveling, and that made her more dangerous than ever, but also vulnerable in ways she didn't recognize. A counter-proposal? Victoria's voice dripped with condescension. My dear child, you seem to be confused about the power dynamics here. You're standing in my warehouse, surrounded by my men, with your precious Eddie hanging like a piñata above your head. What exactly do you think you have to bargain with? Sophia stepped further into the circle of lights, and Alexander moved with her, positioning himself to cover her blind spots the way they'd done instinctively as children during their games of hide-and-seek in the Whitmore mansion. Some bonds, Sophia realized, were stronger than 8 years of separation and trauma. Information, Sophia said simply. Something you've spent 8 years searching for, something that's worth more to you than money or revenge or even our deaths. Victoria's smile faltered slightly. I have all the information I need. I know who you are, where you've been, who helped you. There's nothing left to discover. Really? Sophia reached into her jacket pocket, moving slowly so the snipers wouldn't interpret it as a threat. She pulled out a small, waterproof pouch, the kind used by kayakers and fishermen to protect important documents. Then you already know about the insurance policy Father left behind. The change in Victoria's expression was instantaneous and dramatic. The composed mask slipped completely, revealing something raw and desperate underneath. That's impossible. I destroyed everything, every document, every safety deposit box, every hidden account. You destroyed everything you knew about, Alexander said, understanding dawning in his voice. But there were things Father kept from you, weren't there? Things he suspected even then. Sophia opened the pouch with deliberate care, extracting a single sheet of paper that looked like it had been folded and refolded countless times. The document was water-stained and fragile, but the letterhead was unmistakable. The law firm of Morrison, Reed & Associates. The same firm that had handled the Whitmore family's legal affairs for 3 generations. Eddie didn't just pull me from the river that night, Sophia said, her voice carrying clearly through the vast space. He pulled this out too. It was in my jacket pocket, and somehow it survived the water. I couldn't read it then. I was 8 years old and had a head injury, but I kept it all these years, and when I finally had it translated... Victoria's face had gone bone white. You're lying. There was no document in your jacket. I checked your body myself before... She stopped abruptly, realizing what she'd just revealed. Before you pushed me into the water to make sure I was really dead, Sophia finished. Yes, I remember that part now too. But you were in a hurry, weren't you? The car was smoking, there might have been witnesses, and you needed to get back to playing the grieving stepmother. So you missed this. She held up the document, and even from 20 feet away, Victoria could clearly see the official seals and signatures. It's a codicil to Father's will, dated just 2 weeks before he died. He suspected you were planning something, Victoria. He couldn't prove it, but he suspected. So he took out an insurance policy. Victoria's hand moved toward the gun at her hip, but she stopped herself. She needed to know what that document contained more than she needed to silence Sophia. What does it say? It says that if either Alexander or I die under suspicious circumstances before our 25th birthdays, the entire Whitmore estate reverts to charity, Sophia said. Every penny, every stock share, Every piece of real estate. You get nothing. Less than nothing, actually, because there's a specific clause that any surviving spouse who contests the charitable bequest forfeits even their basic inheritance rights. The silence that followed was profound. Even the warehouse's ambient sounds seemed to pause as Victoria processed the implications. 8 years of murder, manipulation, and obsession, all rendered meaningless by a single piece of paper she'd never known existed. "You're bluffing," Victoria said, but her voice lacked conviction. "If such a document existed, it would have been filed with the primary will. It would be part of the public record." "Not if Father arranged for it to be held in a separate trust, activated only by our deaths," Alexander said. "He was a paranoid man, Victoria. He didn't trust anyone completely, not even the lawyers, especially not the lawyers." Victoria began pacing again, but this time her movements were erratic, desperate. "Even if that's true, it doesn't matter now. You're both past 25. The codicil would have expired." "I'm 26, Sophia said, "but Alexander is 34. The document specifies the conditions remain in effect until both heirs reach 25 or until one of us produces a legitimate heir. Alexander's never been married, never had children. The trust is still active. Which means," Alexander continued, "that if you kill us tonight, you'll have spent 8 years destroying lives for absolutely nothing. The Whitmore fortune will end up funding homeless shelters and children's hospitals instead of lining your pockets." Victoria's tablet slipped from her suddenly nerveless fingers, clattering to the catwalk's metal floor. For a moment, she looked not like a calculating killer, but like a woman watching her life's work crumble into dust. Then, with a sound that was part scream and part sob, she pulled the gun from its holster. "Then I'll burn it all down," she shrieked. "If I can't have it, no one can. At least I'll have the satisfaction of watching you die." She raised the weapon, but Sophia was already moving. 8 years of survival had taught her to read violence in people's eyes, and she'd seen Victoria's sanity finally snap. As the first shot rang out, Sophia dove sideways, rolling behind a stack of rusted shipping containers. The warehouse erupted into chaos. Victoria's snipers began firing at anything that moved, their muzzle flashes strobing like deadly fireworks in the darkness beyond the lights. Alexander scrambled in the opposite direction, drawing fire away from his sister while searching for cover among the warehouse's industrial debris. But Sophia wasn't looking for a place to hide. She was looking for a way up. The crane that held Eddie suspended was controlled from a booth on the warehouse's second level, accessible via a narrow maintenance ladder that ran up the building's eastern wall. If she could reach the controls, she might be able to lower Eddie to safety and eliminate Victoria's primary leverage. The only problem was getting there alive. A bullet sparked off the concrete inches from her head, and Sophia pressed herself deeper into the shadows between containers. Victoria was screaming orders to her men, her voice increasingly unhinged as she realized her carefully orchestrated endgame was slipping away. The woman who'd spent 8 years as a puppet master was discovering what it felt like when the puppets cut their own strings. "Eddie!" Sophia shouted over the gunfire. "Can you swing toward the crane arm?" The old man's voice came back hoarse but determined. "Already working on it, girl, just like the old days in the circus." Circus? Sophia filed that revelation away for later and began working her way toward the maintenance ladder. The route required crossing an open space where Victoria's snipers would have clear shots, but there was no alternative. Eddie wouldn't be able to swing indefinitely, especially not with his injuries. She took a deep breath, said a prayer to whatever gods watched over desperate sisters and stubborn waitresses, and ran. The world exploded around her as every gun in the warehouse opened fire simultaneously. Bullets whined past her ears, sparked off metal surfaces, shattered the remaining windows high above. But Sophia kept running, kept weaving, kept moving toward that ladder with the single-minded determination that had kept her alive for 8 years of exile. Her hand closed around the ladder's bottom rung, just as a sniper's bullet punched through the air where her head had been a split second earlier. She hauled herself upward, climbing with desperate speed as gunfire continued to rake the wall around her. 20 feet, 30, 40. And then she was level with the crane booth, swinging herself through its open doorway just as another volley of shots peppered the ladder below. The control panel was an antique, probably installed when the warehouse was built in the 1960s, but the basic principles were universal. Sophia's hands flew over the switches and levers, and slowly, gratefully, she felt the crane responding to her commands. Eddie's suspended form began to descend toward the warehouse floor, swinging in a controlled arc that would bring him down behind the cover of the shipping containers. "No!" Victoria's scream was audible even over the continuing gunfire. "Kill him! Kill him now!" But Eddie had already reached the ground, and Alexander was there to cut his bonds with a piece of sharp metal he'd found among the debris. The old man was hurt but mobile, and the three of them now had cover and freedom of movement. The balance of power in the warehouse was shifting. "Victoria!" Alexander's voice boomed through the space, amplified by some trick of acoustics. "It's over! Your men are outnumbered by Seattle PD and FBI agents surrounding this building. I activated a dead man's switch when we entered. If I don't check in every 10 minutes, they storm the place." It was a bluff, but a convincing one. Sophia could see some of Victoria's gunmen beginning to look uncertain, their loyalty to their employer wavering as they realized they might have walked into a law enforcement trap. Mercenaries were brave when the odds were in their favor, but none of them wanted to die for Victoria Sterling's obsession. "Liars!" Victoria shrieked, but even she seemed to be losing confidence. "You came alone! You wouldn't risk civilian casualties!" "Try me," Alexander said coldly. "I've spent 8 years believing my sister was dead because of you. I've just gotten her back. How far do you think I'll go to keep her safe?" Sophia could see Victoria from her position in the crane booth, could see the wild desperation in her stepmother's eyes as her carefully constructed world continued to collapse. The woman was beyond reason now, beyond calculation, running purely on hatred and the need to destroy what she couldn't possess, which made her more dangerous than ever. Victoria raised her gun again, but this time she pointed it not at Alexander or Sophia, but at the explosive charges she'd planted on the warehouse's main support beams. "If I can't have the Whitmore fortune, and you won't let me have the satisfaction of killing you personally, then at least I can make sure we all go down together." Her finger tightened on the trigger, and Sophia realized with crystal clarity that Victoria had always planned for this contingency. The explosives weren't just for destroying evidence. They were for ensuring that if her plan failed, everyone would die in the collapse. The ultimate act of spite from a woman who'd rather see the world burn than admit defeat. Time seemed to slow as Victoria's finger completed its squeeze on the trigger. Sophia could see the muzzle flash, could see the bullet speeding toward the detonator, could see 8 years of survival and struggle about to end in fire and falling concrete. But Eddie, broken, beaten, 60-year-old Eddie who'd spent decades living rough on Seattle's streets, moved faster than any of them had thought possible. He launched himself from behind the shipping container where Alexander had cut his bonds, his weathered body becoming a missile aimed at Victoria's position on the catwalk. The collision sent both of them tumbling over the catwalk's railing, falling 20 feet to the warehouse floor below. Victoria's gun spun away into the darkness, and her tablet, the device that controlled her network of assassins, shattered against the concrete with a sound like breaking bones. Sophia was already climbing down from the crane booth, but she knew she was too late to help. Eddie and Victoria had landed hard, and neither of them was moving. Alexander reached them first, checking pulses, assessing damage, doing what he could with no medical training and no equipment. "Eddie's alive," he called out, relief evident in his voice. "Broken ribs, probably a concussion, but alive. Victoria." He didn't need to finish. Victoria Sterling lay in an expanding pool of blood, her ice-blue eyes staring sightlessly at the warehouse's distant ceiling. The woman who'd spent 8 years orchestrating deaths had finally met her own. brought down by the courage of a homeless man she'd dismissed as irrelevant. The gunfire had stopped. Victoria's mercenaries, leaderless and facing the possibility of law enforcement intervention, were melting away into the Seattle morning like shadows before dawn. Some would be caught, others would disappear, but none of them had been willing to die for a dead woman's obsession. Sophia knelt beside Eddie, taking his weathered hand in both of hers. The old man's eyes flickered open, focusing on her face with effort. "Sophia Whitmore," he whispered, and she realized he'd known all along who she was. "Knew I'd see you again someday. Knew you'd grow up strong." "Why didn't you ever tell me?" she asked, tears streaming down her face. "All these years you knew my real name, my family." Eddie's smile was weak but genuine. "You weren't ready to be Sophia Whitmore. You needed to be Maya Chen for a while, needed to learn how to survive on your own terms. But I always knew the day would come when you'd remember who you really were." Alexander joined them, his own eyes bright with unshed tears. "Thank you," he said simply. "For saving her then, and for saving us now." "Just returning a favor," Eddie said, his voice growing fainter. "Your father, he helped me once, long time ago, before the drinking, before I lost everything. Richard Whitmore gave me a job when no one else would, gave me a chance to be better than I was. Figured I owed the family a debt." The pieces clicked into place for Sophia. Eddie hadn't just been a random homeless man who happened to be by the river that night. He'd been there because he was watching over the Whitmore children, trying to repay an old kindness. Her survival hadn't been luck. It had been love, in its own complicated way. As the sound of approaching sirens finally reached the warehouse, Sophia looked around at the destruction Victoria's obsession had wrought. The photographs of innocent people who'd died because they'd shown kindness to a scared girl. The elaborate death trap that spoke to years of twisted planning. The woman who'd tried to steal not just money but identity itself, who'd been willing to murder children to claim a fortune that was never rightfully hers. But Victoria Sterling was dead, and Sophia Whitmore was alive. More than alive. She was free. Free from 8 years of running. Free from the fear that had shaped every decision. Free to reclaim not just her name, but her future. Alexander helped her to her feet as the first police officers entered the warehouse, their tactical lights cutting through the shadows like swords of justice. There would be questions, investigations, legal procedures that would take months to resolve. The Whitmore estate would need to be sorted out, Victoria's victims would need to be memorialized, and the surviving members of her conspiracy would need to be brought to justice. But for the first time in 8 years, Sophia Whitmore was looking forward to tomorrow. She had her brother back, she had her identity back, and she had the chance to honor the memory of everyone who died protecting her by living a life worthy of their sacrifice. As they walked out of the warehouse together, Alexander supporting Eddie, Sophia carrying the precious document that had saved them all, the Seattle dawn was breaking through the fog. The city spread out before them like a promise, no longer a place to hide, but a place to build something new and better. Victoria Sterling had spent 8 years trying to erase Sophia Whitmore from existence. But in the end, she'd only succeeded in forging someone stronger, someone who'd learned that survival wasn't just about staying alive. It was about staying human in a world that sometimes seemed designed to strip away everything that made life worth living. The waitress who'd saved a billionaire's life had turned out to be his long-lost sister. But more than that, she'd turned out to be exactly the person she was always meant to be. Someone who chose courage over safety, truth over comfort, and love over revenge. In the growing light of a new day, Sophia Whitmore was finally truly going home. The end.